It was a busy afternoon at the coffee shop, the kind where the hum of the espresso machines and the chatter of customers blended together into a constant, soothing noise. For the most part, everyone was content. That was until a soldier, dressed in full military uniform, walked through the door. He was tall, his posture proud but tired, his boots clicked against the floor as he made his way to the counter. It was clear he was just off duty, looking for a moment of peace before heading home. His uniform, slightly wrinkled from a long day of work, didn't take away from his presence. There was a quiet confidence in his steps, and though his face was hard to read, there was a certain vulnerability in his eyes. As he approached the counter, he greeted the barista with a smile, his voice polite but carrying a hint of exhaustion. But then, something unexpected happened. An entitled customer, a woman in her mid-40s with a tone as sharp as her designer outfit, scoffed from behind him. She looked him up and down with an air of judgment, clearly irritated by the delay in the line. "Are you seriously going to let him in front of me?" she sneered, her words dripping with disdain. "I mean, really? He's wearing a uniform. I'm sure he can wait like the rest of us." The barista, taken aback, froze. The soldier, who had been calm and patient until now, paused as well. For a moment he just stood there, his eyes glancing at the woman, then at the barista, unsure of how to react. But his hand instinctively moved to his cap, as if adjusting something that had been in place for far longer than just this moment. He was used to this kind of treatment, he'd seen it before, but today, something about the woman's comment stung more than usual. Perhaps it was the exhaustion that had built up over weeks of hard work, or maybe it was just the simple fact that all he wanted was a quiet cup of coffee. The woman, still not satisfied with the line of customers moving too slowly, folded her arms and huffed impatiently, as if the soldier's presence was an inconvenience to her. The tension in the air thickened, but what happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. The barista, still unsure of how to navigate the awkwardness of the situation, was about to apologize and move the soldier aside when the manager, who had been watching from the back, stepped forward. The manager, a middle-aged man named Greg, was known for his calm demeanor and fairness. He'd worked in the coffee shop for years and had handled all sorts of customers, from the polite to the rude, but there was something about the way the woman was speaking to the soldier that rubbed him the wrong way. He walked up to the counter, his shoes clicking with authority as he moved past the barista and stood between the soldier and the woman. His eyes, sharp but kind, scanned the scene quickly. He could feel the tension in the air, could sense the discomfort of the soldier who was trying to keep his composure. Without missing a beat, Greg turned to the woman, his voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but carrying an edge. "I don't think I heard you correctly. Did you just say that this man, who is serving our country, should wait behind you?" The woman, taken aback by his directness, opened her mouth to respond, but Greg didn't let her. "He is in uniform, yes," Greg continued, his eyes locking onto hers. "But more importantly, he's a human being, just like everyone else here. And unlike many of us, he has sacrificed a lot to protect this country, including his time, his safety, and often, his peace of mind. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to step aside." The woman's face flushed a bright red as she stammered, trying to find words. She wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially in a place where she'd always been treated like royalty. But Greg wasn't done. "And," he added, his voice a little louder now, so the rest of the customers in the shop could hear, "if you don't feel comfortable waiting in line with someone in uniform, you're more than welcome to take your business elsewhere." A few heads turned, the atmosphere in the coffee shop shifted, the murmurs of other customers growing louder as they watched the scene unfold. Some looked at the woman with judgment, others with surprise. But the soldier, standing quietly behind Greg, couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude wash over him. It was rare for someone to stand up for him like this, especially in such a public way. He had expected to just let the moment pass and continue with his day, but now, there was a shift in how he felt. The woman, now fuming with embarrassment, glared at Greg, but didn't say another word. She huffed in frustration, grabbed her coffee, and stormed out of the shop, muttering under her breath. Greg turned to the soldier, offering a nod of respect. "Sir, your coffee is on the house today. Thank you for everything you do." The soldier, still processing the sudden confrontation, could only nod in appreciation. His tired eyes softened as he met Greg's gaze. "I appreciate it, more than you know," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment the coffee shop felt like a small, peaceful haven. It was as if the tension had dissolved, replaced by a quiet understanding among the customers and staff. But just when it seemed like everything would return to normal, something else happened that none of them could have predicted. A few minutes later, Greg received an unexpected phone call, and what he learned would change everything. Greg answered the phone with his usual calmness, stepping away from the counter to take the call. His eyes briefly flickered over to the soldier, who had found a seat near the window, staring out as if lost in thought. The atmosphere in the shop had relaxed, but there was still an undercurrent of tension, the kind that always lingered after a confrontation. "Greg speaking," he said, into the phone, his voice steady. There was a brief pause on the other end before a familiar voice came through, sharp and urgent. "Greg, it's James. We need to talk. Now." James, Greg's older brother, worked in a high-level government position. He had been involved in some pretty sensitive matters over the years, so hearing from him like this, especially in the middle of the day, was unusual. "What's going on?" Greg asked, now sensing something was wrong. "I'm sending someone over to see you," James said quickly. "They'll be there in 10 minutes. I can't explain everything on the phone, but it's about the soldier in your shop. It's urgent, Greg, trust me." Greg felt a knot form in his stomach. He glanced at the soldier once again, wondering what this was all about. He hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary, just a man in uniform like so many others, but something about the urgency in his brother's voice made him uneasy. "I'll be waiting," Greg said, trying to mask his concern. He hung up the phone and returned to the counter, keeping his eyes on the soldier. Minutes later, a sleek black car pulled up outside the coffee shop. The driver stepped out, a well-dressed man in a dark suit, carrying a briefcase. He entered the shop with purpose, scanning the room before his eyes landed on Greg. Greg raised an eyebrow. "You must be here for me." The man nodded briskly. "Yes, I'm from the Department of Defense. I've been sent to speak with you about a matter regarding the soldier." The words hit Greg like a ton of bricks. "What's going on? Is he in trouble?" Greg asked, his heart racing. The man looked around, his eyes narrowing. "Not exactly, but he's far more than just a soldier in uniform. His true identity is classified, and I'm not supposed to be telling you this, but we need your help." Greg blinked in confusion, trying to process what was happening. "Help? How?" The man leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "The soldier in your shop. His name is Captain Nathan Carter. He's been undercover for the last 3 years, working on a high-risk operation to infiltrate a criminal organization with ties to national security. What happened here today was a part of his cover, and it's vital that no one knows who he really is." Greg's mind was spinning. He had no idea who Nathan really was, but he had seen him as just another soldier, someone who deserved respect, but nothing more. Now it seemed like he was tangled up in something far bigger than a simple coffee shop encounter. "But, what do you need from me?" Greg asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can I help?" The man's gaze softened slightly, as if he knew how heavy the situation was for Greg. "You need to make sure no one else knows about Captain Carter's true identity. That means keeping this incident quiet. No one else can find out. If the wrong people catch wind of this, it could jeopardize everything he's worked for. We can't afford any mistakes." Greg nodded slowly, his mind racing. He felt a sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders, not just for the soldier, but for the people he cared about too. As he glanced over at Nathan, who was now standing up, looking a little more at ease than before, Greg knew this was bigger than he had ever imagined, and he wasn't sure what kind of trouble this could bring, but he was about to find out. The man from the Department of Defense handed Greg a small, unmarked envelope before he turned to leave. "This is all the information you'll need to keep things quiet," he said quietly. "We'll be in touch if anything else comes up. Just make sure the soldier stays under the radar, Greg." Greg nodded, his mind still reeling from the bombshell that had just been dropped. He watched as the man walked out of the coffee shop, his footsteps purposeful and quick. It took a moment for Greg to fully process everything, but then the weight of it all settled in. Nathan wasn't just a soldier, he was a key figure in a covert operation, an operation that could be compromised by something as small as a public scene in a coffee shop, and Greg had been the one to stand up for him. He looked back at Nathan, who was now at the counter, sipping his coffee quietly, seemingly unaware of the storm brewing around him. Greg swallowed hard, knowing what he had to do next. He had to protect the soldier, but how? Taking a deep breath, Greg walked over to Nathan, who looked up at him in surprise. "Hey Nathan," Greg began, trying to keep his tone casual. I just wanted to apologize for earlier. Things got a little out of hand with that customer. I didn't expect things to escalate like that. Nathan gave a small smile, his posture relaxing a bit. It's fine, man. Honestly, I've been through worse. I just needed a coffee. Greg hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should tell Nathan what he had just learned. But the thought of dragging him into something so dangerous made Greg pause. The soldier didn't deserve to be caught up in this mess. Not when he was already putting his life on the line for something so much bigger than any of them. You know, I've been thinking, Greg said slowly, glancing around the coffee shop to make sure no one was eavesdropping. Maybe it's better if we keep things low-key for a bit. I mean, people can be kind of unpredictable, you know? Nathan raised an eyebrow, clearly picking up on the odd tone in Greg's voice. What do you mean? Greg rubbed the back of his neck, unsure of how to phrase it. I just think it might be a good idea for you to lay low for a while. Maybe take a different route home, or keep your head down just in case. Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment Greg thought he was going to question him. But instead, Nathan seemed to understand. I got it, Nathan replied quietly, his voice betraying a hint of recognition. I'll keep a low profile. Greg nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. But just as he was about to turn and walk back to the counter, the door to the coffee shop swung open once again. This time it wasn't another customer. It was a group of men, wearing suits that looked just a bit too expensive for the usual crowd. They scanned the room quickly, their eyes landing on Nathan, who stiffened slightly, his hand instinctively reaching for the strap of his bag. The men exchanged knowing glances, and Greg immediately felt the shift in the air. Something was wrong. One of the men, the tallest of the group, stepped forward. His voice was smooth, but there was an unmistakable hardness to it. Captain Carter, I presume? Nathan's eyes flickered for a moment, but he didn't respond. His posture had changed again, tense, alert. It was clear he recognized these men, and it wasn't a good sign. Greg's heart raced. He didn't know who these people were, but they weren't here for coffee. The entire atmosphere in the coffee shop had changed in an instant. The man stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Nathan. We need to talk. Now. Nathan took a deep breath, his face hardening as he stood up from his seat, the calm demeanor that had seemed to surround him earlier now completely gone. I'm not going anywhere with you, he said, his voice low but firm. Greg could feel the tension in the air now, thick and heavy. The group of men wasn't here for a simple chat, and whatever it was they wanted from Nathan, it wasn't going to end well. Just when Greg thought the situation was about to spiral out of control, the door swung open once again, this time, with a familiar face. It was the man from the Department of Defense, and he was no longer alone. The door swung open with a sharp creak, and Greg's stomach dropped when he saw the man from the Department of Defense. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two other men followed behind him, dressed in black suits with serious expressions. The air in the coffee shop was thick with tension, the kind that made it hard to breathe. The group of men who had been circling Nathan froze as they saw the new arrivals. For a brief moment, everything stood still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Greg didn't know what to think. His mind raced, wondering if the men from the Department of Defense were there to help, or if they had another agenda. The entire situation had gone from strange to dangerous in a heartbeat. The man from the Department of Defense stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. Gentlemen, he said, his eyes sweeping across the group. I believe you have something you need to discuss with Captain Carter, but I suggest you take it outside. The tension in the room thickened. The group of men in suits exchanged wary looks, clearly trying to assess the new threat. The tallest one, the one who had first addressed Nathan, took a step back, his eyes narrowing. We don't have time for this, he said, his voice harsh. We've been tracking him for too long. He's a liability now. Greg felt his heart race again. This was getting worse by the second. He glanced at Nathan, whose face had gone pale but who was still standing his ground. It was clear these men weren't just anyone, these were dangerous people. You need to leave, the man from the Department of Defense said firmly, his voice brokering no argument. Or I will have you escorted out. This is a national security matter. The group of men seemed to hesitate, their eyes flickering between the new arrivals and Nathan. They weren't willing to give up easily, but the presence of the Department of Defense agents was enough to make them reconsider. With a grunt, The tallest man finally turned toward the door, signaling for the others to follow. "This isn't over," he muttered, under his breath. As they left the coffee shop, Greg exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath this entire time. The atmosphere, once thick with tension, slowly started to loosen. But Greg still felt like he was caught in the middle of something he couldn't fully understand. Nathan stood still, his eyes still fixed on the door where the men had just left. His expression was unreadable, but the weight of the situation was heavy on him. Finally he turned toward Greg, his voice low. "I didn't expect things to get this complicated, but thank you. You just saved my life." Greg shook his head, not quite sure how he had ended up in the middle of all of this. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice unsteady. "But those guys, they knew who you were. Who are they?" Nathan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his coffee, then back at Greg. His eyes were filled with something deep, something that for a moment seemed like sorrow. "They're not just anyone, they're part of a faction that's been hunting me for months," Nathan explained, his voice tense. "I was undercover working a case for the government, but somewhere along the way, things went south. They found out who I was, and now I'm a target. They'll stop at nothing to bring me down." Greg felt his stomach twist. He had no idea what kind of danger he had just walked into. The soldier in front of him wasn't just a man in uniform, he was part of something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. "I never wanted you to get involved in this, Greg," Nathan continued, his voice softer now. "But now that you're part of it, I can't promise it'll be safe. These people, they don't stop. They'll come after anyone who's even remotely connected to me." Greg swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. The gravity of the situation hit him all at once. But something in him couldn't turn away now. He had already made a choice when he stood up for Nathan, when he had defended him in front of the rude customer. He couldn't back down now. "I'm in," Greg said firmly. "I'll do whatever I can to help." Nathan looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But you need to be careful, Greg. This isn't something you can just walk away from." As the two men stood there, a silent understanding passed between them. They were in this together whether they liked it or not. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. The days that followed were filled with tension, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. Greg found himself in the middle of a situation that was spiraling out of control, with no way to predict where it would end. Nathan's world had collided with his own, and now they were both trying to navigate a path through the shadows. Nathan had taken extra precautions, avoiding the coffee shop and staying out of sight as much as possible. But Greg knew that the threat wasn't over. The men who had come for Nathan wouldn't stop until they had him, no matter the cost. One evening, as Greg was closing up the shop, he noticed a familiar figure standing outside, watching from a distance. It was Nathan, looking even more worn out than before. His face was haggard, his clothes slightly rumpled as if he hadn't slept in days. Greg stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward him. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low. Nathan's eyes darted around, scanning the street as if checking for threats. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "I can feel it. They won't stop until they find me, Greg." Greg could see the weight of the world in Nathan's eyes. The soldier had been running, hiding, but the danger was catching up with him. He had seen the fear in Nathan's face before, but it was different now, more real, more urgent. "We can't let them get to you," Greg said, his voice resolute. "We'll figure something out, you can't do this alone." Nathan shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his face. "I'm already too far gone for this to end cleanly. But there's one thing I can do to stop it. I have to go on the offensive. I need to get to their leader before they get to me." Greg felt a chill run down his spine. Nathan was talking about putting himself in even more danger. It wasn't just about running anymore, it was about fighting back. "No," Greg said, his voice shaking with the weight of his words. "You can't do that, you're already in over your head. If you go after them, it'll only make it worse. You need to leave town, disappear for a while, let things cool down." But Nathan's expression was firm, unyielding. "I can't run anymore, they'll just come after me again. This has to end now." Greg took a step forward, his hand gripping Nathan's arm. "You don't have to do this alone. I can help. I know people." I can get you out of here, keep you safe. Nathan looked at him, a flicker of something soft, passing through his hardened exterior. I don't want to drag you into this, Greg, but I don't have much of a choice. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. But in that moment, Greg knew one thing for sure: he couldn't walk away. He had already made his choice, and now there was no turning back. I'm with you, Greg said quietly, his voice filled with determination. We'll get through this. Together. Nathan nodded, though his face remained serious. All right, but we need to move fast. Just then, a distant car engine hummed down the street, growing louder by the second. Nathan's eyes snapped to the sound, his body tensing. We've got company, he muttered under his breath. The two men exchanged a glance, and in that moment, they both knew what had to be done. Whatever the consequences, they would face them together. As the car came into view, the headlights blinding them for a brief second, Nathan turned to Greg. This is it, he said. No more running. Greg's heart raced as the car skidded to a halt in front of them. The doors flew open, and out stepped the group of men in suits, the ones who had been after Nathan all along. But this time, Nathan was ready. This time, there would be no retreat. Thank you so much for following along with this thrilling story. We've seen the tension build, secrets unfold, and bravery tested at every turn. Nathan and Greg's journey proves that sometimes, standing up for what's right can lead to unimaginable consequences. If you've enjoyed the twists, the suspense, and the emotional roller coaster, don't forget to like this story and leave a comment to let us know what you think. Your thoughts and feedback mean a lot to us. Also, if you want to see more exciting stories like this one, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new chapter. And feel free to share this with your friends and family, because great stories are always better when they're shared. Thanks for being part of this journey. Stay tuned for more amazing tales coming your way.